The dust never settles in Kansas. It rises with the convoy trucks, swirls through the prairie wind, and clings to everything. Uniforms, faces, hope. You can taste it on your tongue, gritty and bitter, as the final transport of German women prisoners rolls toward the wire. Spring, 1945. The war is dying, but these women don't know it yet. They peer through canvas flaps at a landscape that seems to stretch beyond the edge of the world. Endless sky, endless grass, and ahead, the geometric precision of an American prison camp. Clean lines, orderly barracks, guards who stand at attention rather than slouch with cigarettes. The trucks groan to a halt. Dust clouds catch the afternoon light like golden ghosts. Through the settling haze, an American officer approaches. Pressed uniform, polished boots, clipboard in hand. The women brace themselves. They've heard stories. They know what prisoners deserve. "Welcome to Camp Ellis," he says simply. Not, "Get out," not "Move." Welcome. The word hangs in the air like something foreign. These women have traveled thousands of miles from bombed cities and broken dreams. Expecting cruelty is familiar as their own language. Instead, they find courtesy. The guards nod rather than sneer. Gates open with mechanical precision, not the violent clang of dungeon doors. They file through processing, photographs, paperwork, medical checks. Each procedure feels strangely normal, clinical, professional. The nurse who checks their temperatures smiles briefly before moving to the next woman. Small gestures that feel enormous in their unexpected gentleness. As evening shadows stretch across the compound, the women are led to their barracks. Clean windows, fresh mattresses, a wash basin with running water that actually runs clear. One woman touches the faucet as if it might disappear. Through the mesh windows, they can see the American guards walking their evening patrol. Young faces, boys who might have been dancing at church socials instead of guarding enemy prisoners. The irony isn't lost on anyone. These are the monsters they were taught to fear. But as the Kansas sun sets behind the fence, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, something shifts in the air. This doesn't feel like captivity. It feels like ... sanctuary ... memory has its own hunger. It gnaws at you in quiet moments, when the present seems too good to be real. These women carry the taste of desperation. Sawdust bread, potato peels boiled into soup, the sharp tang of dandelion greens picked from bomb craters. 6 months ago, Maria stood in the rubble of her Hamburg kitchen, scraping frost from a windowsill to make water for tea that wasn't tea, just hot liquid to trick her stomach into forgetting. The ceiling had collapsed the week before, leaving her stove exposed to April rain. She cooked over candle flames. When candles could be found, Greta remembers the sound of her daughter crying for milk that didn't exist. Store shelves empty as museum displays. Ration cards worthless as autumn leaves. Her husband's last letter mentioned eating grass soup, actually eating grass. Like the cows they could no longer afford to feed, these memories live in their bones now. Cellular reminders of a world where survival meant swallowing pride along with whatever could be found. Where women learned to smile while serving their children meals that wouldn't satisfy a cat. But here, in this American camp, something impossible drifts through the evening air. The smell of meat, real meat, cooking over real flames. Not the desperate sizzle of rat or pigeon, the rich, honest aroma of beef being grilled with actual seasoning. The women press against their barracks windows, breathing in what seems like a hallucination. Through the mesh, they can see the guards' mess hall glowing with warm light. Steam rises from kitchen vents. The sound of laughter carries across the compound. Not the bitter laughter of gallows humor, but the genuine mirth of people who've eaten well and expect to eat well again tomorrow. "They're wasting food," whispers Anna, pressing her face to the glass. But her voice lacks conviction. Her nose betrays her, following the scent like a hunting dog. Her mouth watering despite every rational thought. The contrast burns deeper than hunger ever did. While German cities crumble and German children count potato eyes like treasures, here behind enemy wire, Abundance flows like water from an unguarded well. The moral mathematics make no sense. Prisoners eating better than free citizens. Captives dining while their captors' own enemies starve. Elizabeth touches her hollow cheek, feeling the sharp edge of cheekbone that speaks of months without enough. She thinks of her sister in Berlin, probably gnawing bread crusts and calling it dinner. The irony tastes more bitter than dandelion soup. To be captured was to be fed. As the kitchen sounds fade into evening quiet, the women lie on mattresses softer than anything they've known in years. But sleep comes slowly. How do you rest when your dreams are filled with the impossible scent of grilled beef, and your waking world has become more generous than any dream you dared to have? Asterisk. The mess hall doors swing open like the entrance to another universe. Long tables covered in white cloth. Actual white cloth, not the gray rags that passed for linens back home. Steaming trays arranged with military precision, and smells that make the women pause at the threshold, wondering if they've somehow died and awakened in a farmer's fantasy. The first plate slides across the serving counter. Yellow kernels catch the morning light like scattered gold coins. Corn. Sweet corn, glistening with butter that looks real enough to be actual butter. The serving woman, a local hire with kind eyes and flour-dusted hands, smiles and nods toward the tables. Maria stares at her plate as if it contains live ammunition. Das ist Tierfutter, she whispers to no one in particular. That's animal feed. The words ripple down the serving line, woman to woman, in tones that mix disbelief with bitter amusement. They've seen corn before, of course. Dried kernels ground into meal that scratched the throat and filled the belly with sawdust dreams. Pig feed, cattle fodder, the kind of coarse grain that civilized people fed to livestock while reserving wheat for human consumption. But this corn seems different. Plump kernels that burst with juice. The smell rising from the plate carries sweetness instead of the musty staleness they remember. Several women laugh. The sharp, defensive laughter of people who refuse to believe good fortune when it's served on a dinner plate. They mock us, hisses Greta, pushing the plate away. Feed the German prisoners like animals. Show them what they deserve. Others nod in solidarity. The insult feels familiar, comfortable even. It makes sense in a way that kindness does not. They understand cruelty. They've lived with it for years. But generosity from an enemy? That requires a kind of faith they've forgotten how to have. Yet curiosity proves stronger than pride. Anna, the youngest of them, barely 20 with eyes that still remember hope, picks up her fork. The first bite stops her mid-chew. Her expression shifts from skepticism to surprise to something approaching wonder. The corn doesn't taste like animal feed. It tastes like ... sunshine. Like summer afternoons that existed before the world caught fire. Sweet enough to be dessert, tender enough to melt against the tongue. She swallows slowly, as if the act might break some spell. The laughter fades. One by one, the other women take tentative bites. Forks scrape against plates with increasing enthusiasm. The bitter jokes die in their throats, replaced by the quiet sounds of people, discovering they've been wrong about something fundamental. Elizabeth closes her eyes as she chews, and for a moment she's 8 years old again, sitting in her grandmother's kitchen while summer corn boils in a pot the size of a wash basin. Before the war, before hunger became a way of life, before she learned that food was currency and corn was punishment. When she opens her eyes, the mess hall looks different. The white tablecloths seem less like mockery, more like invitation. The serving women's smiles feel genuine rather than cruel, and the plate of golden kernels has transformed from insult to revelation. They've been eating animal feed for months back home. Sawdust bread, grass soup, anything that could fill the gnawing void. Now they discover that what Americans feed their animals might be better than what Germans feed their children. The second meal arrives like a fever dream made manifest. Steam rises from plates that seem too heavy, too full, too impossible to be real. The smell hits first. Rich, savory, unmistakably the aroma of beef cooked over open flame. Real beef. Thick slabs of it, seared to perfection and still sizzling. Beside the steak, mountains of mashed potatoes whipped white as fresh snow, pooled with butter that gleams like liquid gold. Green beans snapped fresh, not wilted into submission. And coffee, actual coffee, black and strong enough to wake the dead, served in cups that match, like they came from a proper dyeing set. The mess hall falls silent except for the clink of silverware against china. Even the American guards eat the same meal, seated at their own tables, just yards away. No special officers' portions, no hierarchy of nutrition. Everyone, captor and captive alike, receives identical plates of abundance. Maria cuts into her steak, watching pink juices pool around the meat. She hasn't seen beef in 2 years. The last cow in her neighborhood was slaughtered in October 1943, divided among 30 families until each received portions smaller than a child's palm. She'd made that single piece last 3 days, boiling the bones until they gave up their final whisper of flavor. Now she holds more beef on her fork than she'd eaten in the past 6 months combined. The taste explodes across her tongue, tender, perfectly seasoned, cooked by someone who understands that food can be art rather than mere survival. She chews slowly, reverently, afraid that swallowing might end the dream. Across the table, Greta stares at her plate with something approaching religious awe. Wir wurden besser behandelt als Feinde, denn unsere Männer als Soldaten, she whispers. We are treated better as enemies than our men as soldiers. The words carry the weight of moral vertigo. Everything they thought they knew about war, about justice, about the natural order of things, has been served on a dinner plate and found wanting. The guards seem almost uncomfortable with their own generosity. You can see it in their faces. Young American boys who joined up expecting to hate the enemy, now serving meals to women who could be their mothers or sisters. They avoid eye contact, as if aware that their kindness carries political implications. No one wants to examine too closely. Lieutenant Morrison walks through the mess hall, clipboard in hand, checking portions with the mechanical efficiency of military routine. But there's something softer in his expression when he pauses beside the German women's tables. Perhaps guilt, perhaps confusion about orders that demand treating enemies better than some Americans eat at home. Elizabeth watches him pass and realizes something profound. These guards aren't monsters pretending to be men. They're just men, following orders that happen to require decency instead of cruelty. The moral complexity makes her head spin faster than hunger ever did. As the meal progresses, conversations begin tentatively, broken English mixed with German phrases, hands gesturing to bridge language gaps. An American private named Tommy shows Anna how to cut her steak properly. She teaches him to say danke with the correct pronunciation. Small moments of humanity blooming between enemy lines. The final bite tastes different than the first. Less desperate, more contemplative. These women are beginning to understand. They're witnessing something larger than a meal. They're seeing what civilization looks like when it chooses mercy over vengeance, abundance over scarcity, hope over fear. But understanding brings its own burden. If America can feed its prisoners steak while German children eat grass soup, what does that say about the war they fought? About the cause they believed in? About the world they thought they understood? Asterisk. The paper feels foreign beneath their fingers. White, clean, without the gray tinge of wartime recycling. Real paper, not the bark substitutes or newspaper margins they'd learned to write on back home. Even the pencils seem luxurious, wooden, yellow, sharp enough to make clean lines instead of the charcoal sticks they'd grown accustomed to. Maria begins her letter to her sister in Hamburg. Liebe Ruth, I write to you from a place that exists only in dreams. But how do you describe abundance to someone living on potato peels? How do you explain that your captors serve you meals their own citizens would consider festive? The words feel inadequate, almost cruel in their impossibility. They feed us beef, she writes, then stops, crosses it out, tries again. We receive adequate nutrition. Still wrong. Too clinical. She settles on. We eat well here, knowing even that simple truth will sound like fiction. Across the writing room, Greta struggles with her own impossible correspondence. Her husband is somewhere in a Soviet work camp, if he's alive at all. His last letter mentioned shoes made of newspaper and soup so thin you could read through it. Now she must tell him she dines on steak while he starves behind different wire. The Americans are unexpectedly civilized. She writes carefully, aware that censors will read every word. But how do you censor kindness? How do you black out decency? Elizabeth crafts letters to her mother with the precision of a diplomat navigating dangerous territory. She describes the camp conditions in terms that dance around the truth. We are treated according to international law. Our basic needs are met. The staff maintains professional standards. Between the lines, she hopes her mother will read the real message. I am not suffering. I am not broken. I am, impossibly, being shown what the enemy's humanity looks like. And it is beautiful and terrible. And I don't know what to do with this knowledge. The censorship office receives these letters with visible confusion. Lieutenant Patterson holds one up to the light, searching for hidden codes, secret messages, anything that would explain why German prisoners sound so grateful. He discusses the situation with his superior. Sir, these women keep writing about the food, almost like they've never seen it before. What do you mean? Well, sir, they describe regular mess hall meals like their Christmas dinner. Makes me wonder what things are really like over there. Some letters never make it past the censors, not because they contain military secrets, but because their truth feels too dangerous. How do you allow descriptions of American abundance to reach German families without undermining the entire propaganda narrative? How do you explain that enemy prisoners eat better than Allied civilians in London? The black ink flows across sentences like spilled midnight. We receive, and every day, the here is better than anything we had at home. I have gained since arriving, but humanity bleeds through even the heaviest censorship. In the spaces between redacted words, love finds its way. Small details that no censor thinks to eliminate. My cheeks have color. Again, I sleep without dreaming of empty plates. There are flowers planted near our barracks. Someone thought prisoners deserved beauty. Anna's letter to her fiancé contains the most dangerous truth of all. Hans, I fear we may have been wrong about many things. Not wrong about loving our country, but wrong about hating theirs. Does that make me a traitor, or does it make me human? That letter disappears entirely, filed away in some bureaucratic limbo where inconvenient truths go to die. But Anna keeps writing, keeps trying to capture the impossible in words that censors can't quite bring themselves to destroy. Asterisk. Breakfast becomes meditation. Lunch transforms into philosophy. Dinner evolves into prayer. The women don't plan this evolution. It simply happens. The way understanding grows when fed by routine kindness. They sit at tables that have become familiar territories, each woman unconsciously claiming the same seat day after day. The ritual soothes something deeper than hunger, the human need for predictability, for small securities in an uncertain world. Clean plates arrive with military punctuality. Food appears in portions that never vary. Generous, consistent, reliable as sunrise. Maria watches the kitchen staff through the serving window. Mrs. Henderson, the head cook, hums while she works, actually hums, as if feeding enemy prisoners brings her joy rather than resignation. Her hands move with practiced efficiency. Ladle, serve, smile, next plate. No distinction between American guards and German captives. Everyone receives the same portion, the same attention, the same brief moment of human connection. The young guards eat at nearby tables, and proximity breeds familiarity. Private Johnson always saves room for dessert, pushing vegetables around his plate like a reluctant child. Sergeant Martinez reads letters from home while he eats, sometimes sharing news that makes him smile or frown. These small glimpses of personality make them seem less like captors, more like neighbors who happen to wear uniforms. Greta finds herself studying their faces during meals. Boys, really. 18, 19, maybe 20 years old. The same age as her son Klaus, who marched east 2 winters ago and never wrote again. She wonders what their mothers packed in their school lunches, whether they complained about vegetables or asked for seconds on dessert. Tommy, She calls to the young private, who always sits 3 tables away. Her English comes haltingly, mixed with gesture and goodwill. You ... family. Eat good like this? He looks up from his mashed potatoes, surprised to be addressed directly. Ma'am? Oh, you mean back home? He considers the question seriously. Well, not quite this good. Camp cooks better than my mama, but don't tell her I said that. The laughter that follows feels revolutionary. Enemies sharing a joke about cooking, finding common ground in the universal experience of mothers who try their best with whatever they have. These moments accumulate, like small coins in a jar. Elizabeth teaching Sergeant Chun to pronounce German numbers. Anna showing Private Williams how to fold napkins the way her grandmother taught her. Conversations that begin with pointing and gesturing evolve into broken sentences and sometimes achieve actual communication. The moral complexity deepens with each shared meal. These women begin to understand they're not just receiving food. They're witnessing a demonstration of values. The America they were taught to hate doesn't waste resources on prisoner abuse. It spends them on prisoner dignity. The enemy doesn't seek revenge through starvation. It seeks victory through example. But examples can be dangerous things. Every generous meal raises uncomfortable questions. If Americans can afford to feed their enemies so well, how desperate was Germany's situation? If the enemy shows such humanity to captives, what does that say about the propaganda they were fed for years? Elizabeth writes in her contraband diary, hidden beneath her mattress. Though she suspects the guards know and simply choose not to look, we are living inside a contradiction. We are prisoners who feast while free Germans starve. We are enemies treated as guests. We are captives learning what victory with honor looks like. The meals become mirrors, reflecting not just their own situation but the entire moral architecture of the conflict. Each bite of tender beef, each spoonful of real butter, each cup of actual coffee serves as evidence in a trial they never knew they were attending. A trial where their captors stand accused of being better than expected, and their own cause stands accused of being worse than they'd ever imagined. As evening settles over the camp, the women return to their barracks carrying more than full stomachs. They carry the weight of cognitive dissonance, the burden of gratitude toward enemies, the confusion of kindness where cruelty was expected. The news arrives like a whisper that grows into a roar. May 8th, 1945. Germany has surrendered. The war is over. The camp radio crackles with static and celebration. Distant voices from Allied capitals announcing victory. Crowds cheering in London and Paris and New York. But in the mess hall of Camp Ellis, silence spreads like spilled ink. German women sit with forks halfway to their mouths. Food growing cold on plates they no longer see. Surrender. The word carries the weight of everything lost. Cities, husbands, children, dreams, the future itself. Some women begin to cry quietly, tears falling into mashed potatoes that suddenly taste like ash. Others stare at nothing, their minds processing a reality too large to comprehend. Maria thinks of her son Werner, 19 years old and sent to defend Berlin when Berlin could no longer be defended. Is he alive? Is he dead? Is he sitting in some other camp, in some other country, learning that everything he fought for has been declared meaningless by history? The American guards seem unsure how to behave. Victory usually brings celebration, but how do you celebrate in front of the defeated? How do you cheer for your triumph while serving dinner to those who've lost everything? Private Johnson approaches Greta's table hesitantly. She hasn't touched her food, hasn't moved at all since the announcement. Her eyes stare at something beyond the mess hall walls, beyond the Kansas prairie, beyond the present moment. Ma'am? He says softly. You should eat something. She turns to look at him, this boy who could be her son, this enemy who serves her meals and calls her ma'am with genuine respect. So this is defeat? She whispers in English that comes from somewhere deeper than language lessons. He sets down his own tray and sits across from her, a breach of protocol that no one bothers to report. No, ma'am, he says quietly. This is dinner. The simple words carry profound weight. Not triumph, not defeat. Just the continuation of basic human dignity in a world that has forgotten such things exist. He picks up his fork and begins eating, showing her that some rituals transcend politics, that some needs survive even surrender. Slowly, she lifts her own fork. The steak tastes the same as yesterday, tender, perfectly seasoned, prepared with care by people who understand that feeding someone is an act of faith in the future. Defeat hasn't changed the flavor. Surrender hasn't made the meal less nourishing. Around the room, other women begin eating again, not from hunger, but from recognition that this too is a form of resistance, the refusal to let despair overwhelm the simple act of staying alive. If the war is over, then someone must survive to remember it. Someone must live to tell the story of the enemy who chose kindness over vengeance. Lieutenant Morrison walks through the mess hall, observing his strange charges with something approaching paternal concern. These women are no longer prisoners of war. Technically, they're just prisoners, waiting for repatriation to a country that no longer exists in the form they remember. But the meals will continue. The schedules will hold. The small courtesies that made captivity bearable will persist through the transition from war to peace. Because routine is how humans survive impossible transitions, and kindness is how they remember who they used to be. Elizabeth finishes her dinner and realizes something profound. She's not the same woman who arrived here months ago. That woman expected cruelty and received kindness, expected starvation and received abundance, expected to be broken and instead was quietly, carefully rebuilt, one meal at a time. The war is over, but the lesson continues. Every day, 3 times a day, America demonstrates what it means to win with grace, to triumph without cruelty, to be powerful enough to be gentle. The repatriation orders arrive on a Tuesday, typed on official letterhead that makes everything final. Names listed alphabetically, transport assignments, departure dates. The bureaucracy of ending captivity, as methodical as the bureaucracy that began it. But the women move through their packing slowly, reluctantly, like guests leaving a party they didn't expect to enjoy. Possessions that seemed precious months ago now feel inadequate to carry the weight of what they've experienced. How do you pack understanding in a suitcase? How do you fold dignity into a travel bag? Elizabeth stands before her bunk, holding a single kernel of dried corn between her fingers. She'd saved it from her first meal here. A souvenir from the day she discovered that enemy food could taste like kindness. The kernel seems impossibly small to represent such a large transformation, but she wraps it carefully in tissue paper and tucks it into her coat pocket. She'll carry this back to Germany, this tiny seed of contradiction. When people ask about American prison camps, she have evidence that defies every story they want to hear. Not evidence of cruelty survived, but of kindness received. Not tales of victimization, but testimonies of unexpected grace. The mess hall serves one final meal, steak of course, as if the kitchen staff understand the symbolic importance of maintaining consistency to the very end. The women eat slowly, trying to memorize flavors they may never taste again. The conversations are quieter than usual, weighed down by impending goodbye. Mrs. Henderson emerges from the kitchen, carrying a basket of fresh-baked bread, still warm from the oven. She moved from table to table, pressing wrapped loaves into reluctant hands. For the journey, she says to each woman, her eyes suspiciously bright. Maria accepts her loaf and manages to whisper, "Danke," around the lump in her throat. This woman has fed her for months, asking nothing in return except an empty plate and a nod of acknowledgement. Now she sends her away with provisions for a journey toward uncertainty. The trucks arrive after lunch. Military vehicles that look identical to the ones that brought them here. But everything else has changed. The women who climb aboard are not the same hollow-eyed casualties who arrived last spring. They carry themselves differently, straighter, stronger, filled with something they didn't have before. As the convoy prepares to depart, American camp staff gather near the gates. No formal ceremony, no speeches, just people saying goodbye to other people they've come to know. Private Johnson waves his cap and calls out, Don't forget to eat your steak back home. Asterisk. The laughter that erupts is real this time. Soft, human, free of the defensive bitterness that marked their early days. These women are laughing with their former enemies, sharing a joke about abundance in a world returning to scarcity. Greta waves back from her truck window. We will remember, she calls in careful English. We will remember everything. The trucks roll away through Kansas dust that tastes exactly the same as it did months ago. But the women breathing it have learned that dust, like everything else, depends on context. The same particles that once seemed threatening now feel like farewell kisses from a place that taught them enemies could be educators. Captivity could be sanctuary, and mercy could be served 3 times a day on dinner plates. 40 years later, in a kitchen that smells of sauerkraut and Sunday roasts, Elizabeth tells her granddaughter about American prison food. The girl, 16, impatient, raised on stories of victimization and justified anger, rolls her eyes at first. They fed you steak, Oma? In prison, you're making it up. But Elizabeth's hands move with the memory, cutting imaginary meat on an imaginary plate. Her eyes grow distant, focused on something beyond the present moment. Everyday labeling. Steak, potatoes, vegetables. Coffee that tasted like coffee, not ground acorns. The granddaughter's skepticism fades as she recognizes the look in her grandmother's eyes. This isn't storytelling. This is witnessing. These aren't tales crafted for entertainment, but testimonies carved from lived experience. The guards ate the same food we did, Elizabeth continues, her voice soft with wonder that hasn't dimmed in 4 decades. Same portions, same tables, same dignity. They called us ma'am and asked if we needed anything. When was the last time someone called you ma'am and meant it? The kitchen falls quiet, except for the tick of an old clock and the distant sound of traffic. 3 generations of women sit around a table where dinner was always sufficient but rarely abundant, listening to stories that challenge everything they thought they knew about enemies and allies, about justice and mercy, about the true cost of war. But they were the enemy. Oma, they bombed our cities. Elizabeth nods slowly. Yes, they were the enemy. And yes, they bombed our cities. But they also fed me steak when their own people had rationing cards. They treated me with respect when I expected cruelty. They showed me that even in war, some people choose to be human. She reaches into an old wooden box on the shelf, the same box that's held her most precious possessions for decades. From it, she pulls a small piece of tissue paper, yellowed with age. Carefully, she unwraps a single kernel of corn, dried and shrunken, but still recognizable. I kept this, she says, placing it on the kitchen table between them. From my first meal at Camp Ellis, the day I learned that everything I thought I knew about America was wrong. Her granddaughter reaches out tentatively, touching the kernel with one finger. Such a small thing to carry such enormous meaning. Such an ordinary seed to represent such extraordinary transformation. What did it taste like, Oma? That first bite? Elizabeth closes her eyes, and for a moment she's 25 again, sitting in a Kansas mess hall, discovering that enemies could taste like sweetness. Like hope, she says finally. Like the possibility that the world could be different than we expected. Like mercy, served on a dinner plate. The corn kernel sits on the table between them. A communion wafer from the Church of Unexpected Kindness. A relic from the Cathedral of Human Decency. Such a small thing. Such an enormous lesson. History remembers VE Day with photographs of celebrations. Soldiers kissing nurses in Times Square. Crowds dancing in London streets. Champagne flowing in Allied capitals. But the real end of the war happened quietly, in a dozen mess halls scattered across America, where former enemies learned to say, please and thank you, in each other's languages. The true victory wasn't won on battlefields or signed in formal ceremonies. It was served on dinner plates to women who expected punishment and received grace instead. Every meal became a small surrender, not of territory or ideology, but of assumptions about what enemies owe each other. Elizabeth's corn kernel sits in its tissue paper, a tiny monument to the moment when everything changed. Not when armies marched or treaties were signed, but when someone decided that even an enemy deserved dignity. When kitchen staff chose to serve steak instead of scraps, kindness instead of cruelty, hope instead of revenge. The women who returned to Germany carried more than personal memories. They carried testimonies that challenged every comfortable narrative about victimization and villainy. In a world that needed clear distinctions between good and evil, they brought back stories of moral complexity, served with mashed potatoes and gravy. Some people didn't want to hear these stories. They preferred their wars simple, their enemies purely evil, their suffering uncontaminated by gratitude toward captors. But truth has a way of persisting, passed down through dinner conversations and bedtime stories, through grandmothers who kept corn kernels and granddaughters who learned to question everything. The real revolution wasn't political. It was personal. Woman by woman, meal by meal, America demonstrated what victory with honor looked like. Not domination, but demonstration. Not conquest, but conversion. Converting enemies to witnesses, captives to ambassadors of possibility. Years later, diplomats would credit people-to-people exchanges and cultural programs for improving international relations. But the foundation was laid earlier, in camp kitchens where civilian cooks treated enemy prisoners like dinner guests, where young guards learned that ma'am was appropriate address for any woman, regardless of nationality. The war ended not when guns fell silent, but when someone served a prisoner steak and meant it as an act of faith rather than duty. When kitchen staff hummed while feeding enemies. When guards sat down to share meals instead of standing to assert dominance. Empires fall, ideologies crumble, but kindness endures. It lives in corn kernels kept in tissue paper, in stories told to skeptical grandchildren, in the memory of Kansas dust and Kansas generosity. It survives in the knowledge that even in humanity's darkest hours, someone chose light. The meal that ended the war wasn't served in a palace or government building. It was served on a regulation dinner tray to a frightened woman who expected cruelty and received abundance instead. The war ended when she took that first bite and tasted something she'd forgotten existed, the flavor of hope, seasoned with unexpected mercy, served by enemies who chose to be human. Asterisk. The journey from arrival to departure traces the arc of transformation. From dust-covered trucks, bringing frightened women to American soil, through the daily revelations of abundance served with dignity, to the final realization that mercy has a taste that lingers across decades. The war truly ended not with surrender documents, but with the understanding that enemies could become teachers, captors could become caregivers, and a single act of kindness could echo through generations.